Hello and welcome. In literature, there are open-ended questions that allow students to use a variety of characters to give examples and to build background information in answering questions. For example, basing your argument on Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House, write an essay to justify the claim that self-sacrifice and love for family are virtues that lead to immense success and joy in the families. When answering such a question, the student or candidate is allowed to use a variety of characters, and like in the previous video where the question narrowed down on Nora, now the students are allowed to use a variety of characters to give the background information. Now, one of the very first things we normally do, or I advise, is that when a question is set, the first thing to do is to identify by underlining the key facets of that question. And in this case, there are two key facets: self-sacrifice and love. After underlining these facets, it is important to write them at the center of our rectangle. After writing them at the center, then we can draw 4 lines to represent the 4 points, and each of the points will flow from self-sacrifice and love at the center. This helps the student to build background information by focusing on a particular point until it is exhausted. For example, we can look at self-sacrifice from the perspective of Mrs. Linde. What does she sacrifice? When does she sacrifice? How? Why? And to who? And what are the results of her sacrifice? Then we can look at 2 aspects: Nora, how she sacrifices to ensure that her husband, Helmer, is healed. We can also look at Nora, how she sacrifices to protect her children from being infringed on or polluted by the scourge of lies. And lastly, we can look at the nurse of Nora, Anne, what she sacrifices and the result of her sacrifice and true love. After highlighting these 4 points, the candidate can now go on to write some short notes briefly before beginning to answer the question paper. This will help the students to build the information that would give excellent answers at the end of this particular essay. For example, when focusing on Mrs. Linde, the student would first explain that Mrs. Linde sacrifices her love for Krogstad. The question is why? This is because she had 2 issues at hand. Number 1, a bedridden mother. Number 2, 2 helpless siblings. And therefore, when she sacrifices, she really loves Krogstad, but she sacrifices the love between them in order for the family, that is the mother and the 2 siblings, to be okay. And she does this to provide for the helpless mother. Krogstad prospects at that time seemed hopeless. And this therefore means if she had stuck with Krogstad, then the family could have suffered. She therefore sacrifices the love in order to provide for them. Unfortunately, later on the rich man dies and Mrs. Linde remains on her own. That's when she again seeks to have a union with Krogstad. But it is evident then, therefore, that she sacrifices her need for love in order to provide for the family, because she loves the family. 2, we can focus on Anne. Anne, the maid. At one time, Anne has a child, but the wicked man provides her with nothing. What does she do? Anne gives up her child to be with strangers in order to be the nurse of Nora. She sacrifices the mother-daughter relationship with her child so that she can build up the life of Nora and her children. She wants to provide for Nora's children an opportunity to grow well, and she in the process has to sacrifice her own children. She loves to see her family grow up appropriately. And the wicked man who made her pregnant did not provide anything, but This did not stop the young child from getting married and later on being confirmed, as she later on reveals. So she sacrifices the daughter-mother relationship and union just to ensure that Nora also shows self-sacrifice when she gives preferential treatment to her husband instead of her father. This happens when Nora has to choose between taking her husband to the south for treatment and taking care of her ill father. She chooses to take care of her husband, and the father later dies, and she says this becomes the saddest time of her life because she was very fond of her father. She sacrifices the fondness to ensure that her husband is healed, and later on he can provide for the family. Lastly, Nora also shows self-sacrifice when the maid brings the children to play with her. She refuses. This happens after Helma has revealed to her that the air of life impurifies the children and intoxifies them. She then therefore wants to keep them safe and does not accept to play with them when the nurse brings the children to her. Eventually, she leaves this marriage because she believes the maid would take good care of the children, unlike her, who is impurified by the air of lies. As you can see from the examples we have looked at, an open-ended question allows the student or a candidate to pick a variety of characters and use them to build background information when answering such questions. Always note that when reading a question, it is good to identify if it is open-ended or closed-ended in order to answer appropriately. Thanks for your time. God bless, and remember to subscribe. Thank you very much.